On Velhia, where a being's worth was measured by their reproductive capability, Juno stood like a monument to everything they feared. 2.5 meters tall, shoulders broad as doorways, hands that could cradle their skulls like teacups. Her body was a reminder of what happened when biological algorithms failed to synchronize. They had a word for her kind: unpairable. Someone who could not broadcast the correct biological signals, whose body existed outside the careful calibrations of their society. The first time Juno stepped off the transport vessel, the scanning systems flashed red. Confused officials huddled around screens, rechecking parameters. The medical attendant scanned her twice, 3 times, before concluding with quiet finality, "No reactive." The system cannot parse her biology for reproductive compatibility. Juno had known she would be different here. That was the point of the cultural exchange program. But she hadn't expected to be rendered invisible by a single scan. "I was a team captain back on Earth," she tried to explain during her orientation. "My height was considered an advantage." The Velhian administrator had simply blinked her secondary eyelids, a gesture Juno would come to recognize as dismissal, and said, "Your physical dimensions are of no consequence. The inability to broadcast compatible reproductive signals makes you unlin, without value." And so Juno learned to make herself smaller, hunching her shoulders as she walked the prismatic streets of Velhia's capital city. She'd been assigned quarters on the outskirts, away from the reproduction-eligible population, in a building with vaulted ceilings meant for storing equipment, not housing people. Everything here seemed designed to remind her that she didn't belong. From the doorways, she had to duck under to the chairs that creaked ominously beneath her weight. Each morning, she reported to the Cultural Integration Center, where she worked translating Earth documents into formats the Velhians could understand. She worked alone in a corner office, receiving assignments through digital channels rather than in person. She spoke to no one. No one spoke to her. The elegant, willowy Velhians glided past her workstation, their gazes sliding away from her like water off wax surfaces. Until the day Rowan arrived. He was human, like her, but where Juno towered, Rowan stood barely reaching her shoulder. Slight of build, with clever hands and thoughtful eyes, he moved through the center with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to navigating spaces not built for him. As the new technical liaison, he was responsible for maintaining the communication arrays that connected Velhia to Earth. The first time their paths crossed in the narrow hallway leading to the archives, Juno pressed herself against the wall, a habit formed from months of trying to occupy less space. "You don't have to do that," he said, stopping several paces away. "There's plenty of room." His voice carried no mockery, his eyes no fear. He simply stood there, waiting, as if her size was a neutral fact rather than an aberration. "Force of habit," she mumbled, straightening slowly. "I'm Rowan." "Juno." "I know." When she raised an eyebrow, he added, "You're the only other human here. Hard not to notice." For the first time in months, Juno felt seen rather than observed. As they passed each other in that narrow hallway, something inside her shifted, like a mountain sensing the first whisper of spring after a long winter. The next day, Rowan appeared at her workstation with 2 steaming cups. "Thought you might like some coffee." Real coffee, not that Velhian substitute that tastes like fermented seaweed. She accepted the cup with careful hands. "How did you even get this?" "I have my ways." He pulled up a chair, one that looked sturdier than her own, and sat. "Mind if I join you? The technical stations are next to the atmospheric regulators. Makes my equipment readings go haywire." It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Juno found herself nodding anyway. They worked in companionable silence that day, and the next, and the one after that. Gradually, silence gave way to conversation, tentative at first, then flowing more freely. Rowan spoke of his work as a communications technician on Earth, of the accident that had left him with a slight limp, of his fascination with the Velhian approach to technology. "They integrated so seamlessly into their biology," he said one afternoon, hands animated as he described the neural interfaces. "But they're so rigid about which bodies are allowed to integrate." Juno nodded, understanding the unspoken parallel to her own situation. Everything here is about fit, compatibility. Maybe that's why they call it pairing rather than reproduction, Rowan mused. It's less about creating new life and more about finding the right biological puzzle pieces. And my pieces don't fit their puzzle, Juno said, the old bitterness rising like bile. Rowan's gaze was steady. Their puzzle, not everyone's. Something in his voice made her look up sharply, but he had already turned back to his work, leaving her to wonder if she had imagined the gentle emphasis on his words. As weeks passed, their companionship deepened. They began taking lunch together in the rooftop garden where massive leaves provided shade from Velhia's twin sons. It was there, surrounded by twisting violet vines, that Juno finally spoke of the isolation she'd endured. Before you came, I went 23 days without anyone speaking directly to me, she confessed. Not even to say excuse me when they needed to get past. They would just wait until I moved. Rowan's hand twitched, as if he wanted to reach out, but thought better of it. I know something about being invisible, he said quietly. Back on Earth, being this size made people look past me, not at me. Different reason, same result. At least Earth didn't have an actual system declaring you biologically worthless, Juno said with a hollow laugh. No, just a cultural one. His smile was wry. Less official, equally effective. It was strange, Juno thought, how quickly they had fallen into this understanding. Two humans from the same planet who had never quite belonged there, now finding common ground on a world where neither of them truly fit. They both noticed the whispers that followed them now. Velhians observing their growing closeness with a mixture of confusion and distaste. The Translation Center's director, a tall Velhian with shimmering scales along her temples, even called Juno into her office to express concerns about cross-cultural contamination. Your status as unlin makes any pairing inadvisable, she said, her voice melodic despite the harshness of her words. It would be inappropriate to encourage attachments that cannot fulfill biological imperatives. Juno had simply nodded, swallowing the fury that rose within her. She didn't bother explaining that she and Rowan were just friends, that there was nothing romantic between them. The Velhians wouldn't understand, or perhaps they understood too well that connection itself was dangerous to their carefully calibrated world. But neither she nor Rowan allowed the scrutiny to diminish their friendship. If anything, it strengthened their bond, a quiet defiance against a system that sought to dictate who deserved companionship. 3 months after Rowan's arrival, Juno began experiencing strange symptoms. Dizziness in the mornings, a persistent fatigue that made her limbs feel leaden, unusual sensitivity to the aromas of the Velhian cuisine she had finally grown accustomed to. You're working too hard, Rowan said when she mentioned feeling unwell. Take a break. The cultural texts have survived thousands of years. They can wait another day for translation. But Juno pushed through, ignoring the warnings her body was sending, until the day she couldn't ignore them anymore. She was in the middle of translating an ancient Velhian creation myth when a room began to spin. The glowing text before her blurred, the words swimming like fish in a rapidly darkening pond. She heard Rowan call her name, felt his hands trying to steady her as her knees buckled. Then nothing. When she awoke, she was in the medical bay, surrounded by Velhian healers who stood at an unusually respectful distance from her bed. Their secondary eyelids were fully retracted, a sign of alertness she had rarely seen directed at her. What happened? She asked, her mouth dry. Before anyone could answer, Rowan was at her side, his face a mixture of concern and something else, something that looked almost like wonder. Juno, he said softly, they've done some scans. You're pregnant. The world seemed to stop. That's not possible. The systems declared me unpairable, non-compatible. One of the Velhian healers stepped forward, her movements precise and measured. The systems were calibrated for Velhian biology. Your human variance was outside our parameters. She paused, tilting her head. But it appears humans have their own parameters. Juno's hand moved unconsciously to her stomach. I'm really... Yes, Rowan said, his voice steady even as his eyes shone with emotion. About 12 weeks along, they think. 12 weeks. Juno did the mental calculation. That would place conception right around the time she and Rowan had. A memory surfaced, a night when homesickness had driven them both to seek comfort in the observatory, watching the strange constellations of Velhia while sharing stories of Earth. How their hands had found each other in the darkness. How one touch had led to another, hesitant at first, then with growing certainty. How they had discovered that whatever their differences in size, their bodies spoke a language that transcended physical dimensions. She looked at Rowan now, seeing in his face that he had made the same calculation. But they said I couldn't. They said you couldn't pair with them, he corrected gently. They never tested human compatibility. The news spread through Velhian society like wildfire. The Unlin human was carrying a child, a biological impossibility according to their sacred systems. Some called it an abomination, others a miracle. The elders, the governing council of Velhia, demanded an official verification. And so, 6 days after learning of her pregnancy, Juno found herself standing before the council in the grand chamber, her body now visibly changing as her pregnancy progressed with unexpected speed. Rowan stood beside her, his presence a quiet anchor in the storm of scrutiny. "You claim to be carrying new life," said the chief elder, her voice resonating through the vaulted chamber. "Yet our most sophisticated scanning systems declared you unpairable. How do you explain this contradiction?" Juno took a deep breath. In the past, she might have apologized, might have made herself smaller in the face of their authority. But something had changed within her, a certainty that had taken root alongside the life growing in her womb. "I don't need to explain it," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "My body doesn't require your validation to exist. It doesn't need your permission to create life. The contradiction isn't in me. It's in your systems that deem me worthless because I didn't fit your narrow definition of value." A murmur ran through the assembled Velhians. The chief elder's secondary eyelids flickered rapidly, a sign of distress. "Our systems have maintained biological harmony for millennia," she countered. "They are not arbitrary. They are essential to our survival." "Then perhaps they need updating," Juno suggested. "Because I'm standing here, alive, fertile, and carrying a child your system said I couldn't conceive. How many others have you dismissed as Unlin who simply needed a different context to thrive?" The question hung in the air, unanswered but undeniably present. In the silence that followed, Rowan stepped forward. "Your Eminence," he addressed the chief elder with perfect Velhian deference, "I believe what Juno is demonstrating isn't a failure of your systems, but an opportunity to expand them. Earth has long understood that diversity strengthens rather than weakens biological resilience. Perhaps this child, part human, part whatever mysteries our combined genetics will reveal, represents not a contradiction, but an evolution." The council deliberated for hours while Juno and Rowan waited outside the chamber. When they were finally called back in, the chief elder's expression was unreadable. "We have reached a decision," she announced. "The human Juno will be reclassified from Unlin to exoperable, capable of reproduction outside standard parameters. Our medical facilities will monitor this unprecedented pregnancy, and all data will be recorded for future consideration of our biological frameworks." It wasn't exactly acceptance, Juno thought, but it was a start. In the weeks that followed, subtle changes began to ripple through Velhian society. The terms unpairable and null reactive were quietly removed from official documentation. Several Velhians who had previously been classified as reproductively unviable requested reassessment. The medical bay began developing new scanning systems designed to recognize a wider range of biological signals. Juno observed these changes with cautious optimism, but she remained focused on her own rapidly changing reality. Her pregnancy progressed at an accelerated rate, a side effect, the healers theorized, of the unique genetic combination she carried. Her body, already large by Velhian standards, expanded further to accommodate the growing life within. Rowan was with her every step of the way. He moved his quarters nearer to hers, claiming it was more efficient for work purposes, but they both knew the real reason. In the evenings, he would sit beside her, his hands gentle on her swollen belly, feeling the powerful movements of their child. "I think she's going to take after you," he said one night, as a particularly strong kick made Juno wince. "She?" Juno raised an eyebrow. "The healers haven't determined sex yet." Rowan shrugged. "Just a feeling." "Well, if she does take after me, I hope she has your patience," Juno said, leaning back against the specially reinforced chair Rowan had constructed for her, "and your ability to see value where others see only difference." His hand found hers in the dim light. "She'll have the best of both of us. And something entirely her own, too." As her due date approached, Juno and Rowan decided to move away from the capital to a small dwelling on the edge of the crystal forest. The house, with its high ceilings and sturdy construction, had once been used to store harvesting equipment, but had been converted into a comfortable home. With Rowan's technical expertise and the surprising assistance of several young Velhian engineers who had become fascinated by the human pregnancy, it was there, surrounded by the singing trees of Velhia, that Juno went into labor. The process was intense, but mercifully quick, her powerful body working with efficient determination to bring forth new life. When the healers placed the infant in her arms, Juno's breath caught in her throat. The child was beautiful, perfect in a way that defied categorization. Slightly larger than an average human infant, with skin that seemed to shimmer faintly in certain lights. Her eyes, when they opened, revealed pupils that adjusted their shape in a distinctly Velhian manner, though the irises were human blue. "She's magnificent," Rowan whispered, perched on the edge of the bed, his eyes never leaving their daughter's face. "She's impossible," Juno replied with a soft laugh. According to everything they believed, the child, whom they named Aurora, after the Earth phenomenon neither of them had ever witnessed but both had dreamed of seeing, thrived in their forest home. She grew quickly, displaying traits from both her human parents along with subtle characteristics that belonged to neither species. Her blood contained elements found only in Velhian physiology. Her neural patterns showed unusual complexity, and when she laughed, which she did often, the sound carried harmonic overtones that made the crystal trees around their home resonate in response. Word of the hybrid child spread, and occasionally curious Velhians would make the journey to the forest edge to observe this biological miracle. Some came with scientific interest, others with spiritual questions. Juno received them all with a graciousness born of her own experience as an outsider, but she never allowed Aurora to be treated as a specimen or curiosity. "She is a child," she would say firmly, "not a case study." As Aurora grew, so too did the changes in Velhian society. The rigid biological criteria that had once determined social standing began to loosen. New terms emerged in the language, words that acknowledge value beyond reproductive capability. The scanning systems, once used to separate the worthy from the worthless, were reprogrammed to identify health needs rather than social classification. Juno didn't take credit for these changes. She and Rowan had never set out to be revolutionaries or symbols. They had simply lived their truth, that love could find expression between bodies of any size, that worth wasn't determined by biological compatibility, that sometimes the most beautiful things grew from what was deemed impossible. 5 years after Aurora's birth, the family received an unexpected visitor, the chief elder herself, now retired from her position but still commanding respect with her presence. "I came to see the child," she said, her secondary eyelids relaxed in a way that signaled openness, "and to acknowledge that our systems were incomplete." Juno invited her in, watching as the former leader's gaze fell upon Aurora, who was constructing an intricate model of the Velhian solar system from crystal shards and twine. "She has your determination," the elder observed, "and his precision, and a few things that belong to neither of us," Juno added. The elder nodded. "That is the nature of new life. Always something unexpected." She hesitated, then added, "We have been studying the data from your pregnancy. It has led to significant advancements in our understanding of biological compatibility. I'm glad something good came of our contradiction, Juno said, unable to keep a hint of the old bitterness from her voice. The elder's secondary eyelids flickered in acknowledgement of the rebuke. The contradiction was in our thinking, not in your existence. I understand that now. She turned to go, then paused. The term unparable has been officially removed from our lexicon. It no longer exists in any of our systems. After she left, Rowan found Juno sitting in her specially built chair, the one he had crafted with his own hands to perfectly accommodate her frame. Aurora was curled in her lap, sleeping peacefully, her small body fitting perfectly against her mother's large one. "What are you thinking?" he asked, kneeling beside them. "About words," Juno replied. "How they can cage us or free us. How unparable no longer exists, but we do." She stroked Aurora's shimmering hair. "How impossible is just another word for not yet." Rowan smiled, resting his head against her knee. In the quiet of their home, with the crystal trees singing softly outside, the three of them formed a picture that once would have been inconceivable on Velhia. A woman too large, a man too small, and a child who should never have existed. Yet here they were, defying all calculations and predictions, living proof that sometimes the most powerful word isn't impossible or even possible. It's simply begin. In the years that followed, Aurora would grow into a bridge between two worlds. Not just Earth and Velhia, but between rigid certainty and open possibility. Other hybrid children would eventually be born, though none quite like her. The society that had once cast out her mother gradually transformed into one that recognized the strength in diversity. And in their forest home, Juno would often sit in her special chair, holding her impossible child, telling her stories of a time when both of them had been told they couldn't exist. Stories that now sounded like ancient myths rather than recent history. But we knew better, she would conclude, as Aurora's eyes, human in color, Velhian in function, blinked sleepily. We knew that sometimes the body everyone says is wrong is exactly the one that's needed. We knew that love doesn't require matching pieces, just pieces that choose to fit together. And as her daughter drifted to sleep, Juno would look across the room to where Rowan worked on his latest invention. Hands precise, eyes focused, body small, but presence immense. She would remember how they had found each other in a world that had tried to render them both invisible for opposite reasons. How they had created life that combined the best of them while being entirely its own being. How they had proven that there was no such thing as unparable. Only people who hadn't yet found where they belonged.